The Korean film Myeongnang, or Roaring Currents, as it's known in English, has been breaking box office records. Admiral Yi Sun-sin of the Joseon dynasty led 12 ships into battle against 300 Japanese vessels and won. His strong leadership has captured the attention of Korean society.
출정하라.
In August, about 1 million people filled Gwanghwamun Square to see and listen to Pope Francis. People began gathering as early as 4 a.m. The Pope's humility impressed the Korean people and provided a new leadership role model. The conflicts and disputes in Korean society have intensified since April's Seoul ferry disaster.
깊게 받아들이면서
Why is the public attracted to leaders like Admiral Yi Sun-sin and Pope Francis?
이순신 장군님이야 뭐 명량
Just like in the film Myeongnang, Admiral Yi is widely respected because he sacrificed himself to protect the nation. The public was also impressed by the Pope since he showed he was concerned about the various challenges facing Korea, including the Seoul ferry disaster.
많은 국민들이 열광하고
Unlike the leaders of today, both Admiral Yi and Pope Francis listen to the public and sacrifice themselves to tackle problems. I think that's why the public is strongly attracted to their leadership styles.
정치라는 게 저는
Politicians should
생각하기에
embrace the opinions of the public and the entire society, but most of the politicians today tend to focus more on promoting their own policies rather than listening to the opinions of others. It is difficult to develop effective policies if you don't pay attention to public opinion.
그 이전에
리더자의 자리에 있는 사람이라면
Now is the time for a leader who sacrifices to help others, like the people who helped the victims of the Seoul ferry disaster. We should be looking for a leader who looks out for others, not their own interests.
On today's Upfront, we assess the leadership styles that best fit with Korean society.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Upfront. I'm Na-hyun Kyung.
Hello, I'm Yoo Jong-soo. On today's Upfront, we discuss leadership or the lack thereof in Korea today.
For today's in-depth discussion, on my left, we have Professor Park Jin, the former chairman of the National Assembly's Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Professor Kim In-mi, the dean of Ewha Women's University's Graduate School of International Studies. Pleasure to have you both on our program. Now, today we are going to talk about leadership. So to warm things up a bit, let's talk about one of Korea's most revered heroes, Admiral Yi Sun-sin.
Right. Over 70 million Koreans have seen the movie Myeongnang or the Roaring Currents in English. Why do you think Koreans are so fascinated and even fanatical about the leadership of Admiral Yi?
I think the Koreans feel that we're sort of in a crisis, both internationally, diplomatic affairs, and also internally, with many issues like a roaring current inside Korea. And we're really looking for a great leader that would rescue us from all these problems. And I think through Admiral Yi, we're looking at a visionary, great leader.
It was an inspiring movie, of course. And I liked it a lot. I went to see the movie with my family. It's a kind of heavy stuff, lots of battle scenes and military strategies and so on. But it is a very thought-provoking movie. It makes us think about what is leadership, what is patriotism, and what is the role of a leader in times of crisis. As a naval officer myself, I was totally excited to see such a good movie covering a historic period in the history of our nation. And I recommend this movie to everybody.
Well, it's not just in recent days, too. People in the publishing and movie industry say that using the story of Admiral Yi Sun-sin almost never fails to make a hit. But is he a fit role model for modern times, though?
I think so. Obviously, Yi Sun-sin himself was not a democratic leader in the sense of the modern democracy. He was a patriarchal figure. He was a charismatic general. He was ruthless sometimes, and sometimes human too. But the period he lived in was totally different from the modern democracy. It was a monolithic monarchy, and there was a strict division of social strata. But Yi Sun-sin tried to do his best, tried to defend the country. He loved the people, and also he communicated well with the public. So those are the characteristics that people are looking for, especially at this time of modern democracy in Korea. We are faced with many challenges, and obviously people look for leader with vision and strategy.
I also think that Yi Sun-sin, although he was a leader many hundred years ago, the reason why he resonates with people in the 21st century is because he's an empathetic leader. He understands and respects the people, and he shows epitome of self-sacrifice. When he found out that the people were very afraid of the Japanese army, and fear was the thing that really surrounded the people, he took advantage of that. He didn't say you must get rid of your fear, but he worked with that. He totally respected the people's emotions and then used that to in his strategy. So I think understanding and respecting the people was really a core of his leadership. And that I think really resonates with the 21st century democracy. He showed great empathy to the people and to his soldiers.
So as a matter of fact, we have someone who thinks very highly of Admiral Yi Sun-sin, Mr. Henri Compton. He's a cartoonist of the Yi Sun-sin series in the U.S. Thank you very much for joining us. Hello there. Now, we'd like to start with what most people would wonder. You are not Korean, and you probably didn't grow up with the story of Admiral Yi. What inspired you to create the Yi Sun-sin series?
So one day I came across this DVD series, The Immortal Yi Sun-sin, and I checked it out. It was recommended to me by a friend of mine at the time. And when I saw this, I was so inspired by it that after I had seen it, I decided that I had wanted to make a comic book series about Admiral Yi.
How do you describe Admiral Yi in your cartoon, and what has been the response from the readers?
Admiral Yi has depicted the way I feel that he is always, the way he's seen in Korea, the way people in Korea see him, in the sense that they admire him very much, and they respect him because of what he did, because of his character. And I wanted the integrity of his character to really remain intact with our series. So I spent a long time doing research on on Admiral Yi before actually writing the comic, because it took me a long time to kind of figure out what I wanted the focus on my story to be. How to depict Yi Sun-sin was not really the difficult thing. I knew how he needed to be depicted, and that was not challenging. It was really just the focus of the story itself that kind of became challenging. And so far, knock on wood, we've made some pretty good decisions. The response from our readers has been nothing but fantastic. We've had some problems with finding a publisher, but despite not having a publisher, we've sold over 35,000 books to date, and our numbers just keep on going up. And we get so many wonderful responses from our readership from across the USA. They tell us how much they love the book, and we even get responses from Canada and Germany and other parts of the world. So it's been really wonderful. It's been a great ride, and we're looking forward to really bringing this to the world as future issues come out.
Now, you had mentioned that Admiral Yi is a real superhero of our time. Why do you say that?
this goes back to the reason why I actually decided to do this in the first place. So back in 2006, there was a big boom in superhero comics, and I had realized that superheroes were kind of losing interest in my eye. I was starting to get a little bored with them, and I realized that I needed some sort of heroic figure to be portrayed in my series. And when I discovered that Yi Sun-sin actually existed, that pretty much made him rival any other superhero that I had read about, because unlike them, he actually exists, and he achieved such wonderful things, and well, not wonderful things, but he achieved such miraculous victories against the Japanese. He saved his people, and he was a true hero. I'm from Russian and Jewish descent, and basically, my people and my culture have always been oppressed. So for me to discover that there was this one person who defended his people, it was very inspiring.
All right, thank you very much for your time today. That was Mr. Henri Compen. He's the cartoonist and creator of the Yi Sun-sin series in the U.S.
Of those over 17 million viewers of the movie, it has been particularly popular among people in their 40s. This can be interpreted that the middle-aged Koreans are hugely attracted to the leadership story of Admiral Lee. What can you make of this phenomenon?
I thought about why. I've been reading up in the newspapers, and they said it's the 40s. Usually in the movies, it's the 20s and 30s who often go to the movie theater, but it wasn't people in their 40s and men in particular as well. Maybe because it's a war movie, but I think there's a little more to that. They're looking for a leader, a boss that understands them, works with them, shows true respect. I don't know if you have seen a comedy gag concert. And they have this scene about young salarymen who are totally frustrated with their bosses. And it shows that they want a leader, even in a hierarchical society, to understand them and respect them and do the work themselves too, to show some self-sacrifice. I think that's what's missing in the 40s generation in their role in society, when they have bosses and they have underlings, and they need to see a person who can connect with both their bosses as well as their underlings.
I think that the character of Yi Sun-sin in the movie was really fascinating. Excuse me. He showed the leadership based on mutual trust and communication, as Professor Kim said, the respect for the people. But also he did make a very important decision, very difficult decision in times of crisis. People in their 40s now in Korea are the mainstay of our society. They are the breadwinners of the families. They are backbone of our social structure. They are under enormous pressure, especially the country is now faced with economic difficulties, the household debts, and the real estate market is still stagnating. And also we hear a lot of news about the human rights issue in the military, the treatment of the soldiers, and obviously the impact of the Sewol-ho disaster, which is a kind of collective trauma to the people in general. So obviously people try to find some inspiring leadership, something that can make them think that we can have dream and we can have a hope and we can make a breakthrough to the challenges that we are faced with. And certainly Admiral Yi Sun-sin showed the true leadership, and he also showed what the true leadership should aspire for.
So it was a bit of an outlet for the people or in their 40s, where they can alleviate their stress a little bit in that way. Now there's another figure that has provoked people's interest recently, and that's Pope Francis. Now why were so many people touched by his leadership, and what can we learn from his leadership style?
I think the first key word is humility. He was really with the people and the lowest of the lowest. When he met with the disabled persons, he really knelt down and kissed them and embraced them. And you can see that he was truly sincere, and he showed great humility in his behavior. He didn't take advantage of all the privileges that come with the people office. He rides a common vehicle, he rides the subway, and so on. So he showed by action how humble he is and how he loves the people. And I think that really comes through. He's transparent in and out. He's the same. He's not a duplicitous person where the public persona may seem like a great person, but in private doing something else. He's a truly transparent, great visionary person.
So it's not just showmanship, so it's the sincerity that counts in a way.
To many Koreans, Pope Francis was a man of modesty, very down to earth, and he could communicate with the people in distress. He met with the disabled people in Kotongnae Maul, and also he met with the distressed people, like the families of the victims of the Sewol disaster. He cared about them. He didn't say a lot of words, but his leadership was spoken through his actions. And also he met with the distraught people like comfort women who were sexually abused by the Japanese Imperial Army during the Pacific War. So he spoke with his actions, with his word, with his body, and that was really inspiring to many Koreans. I could see that he was really a man of a humble character. He was wearing a $50 swatch on his wrist, and he was wearing a sworn cross on his chest, and he lives in a very humble house, kind of a guest house for clergymen. So that's what many people were very impressed. And Korea is a Confucian society. In a way, we look for some benevolent father figure, and Pope Francis certainly filled that vacuum which exists in our society now.
Well, you're right. The actions speak louder than the words. Particularly the many politicians that have pledged they would like to learn the leadership style from Pope Francis or Admiral Lee. What do you think? Do you think they really successfully follow, or they can just imitate their the leadership style?
I think it's encouraging that many political leaders find their inspiration from the Francis Pope's behavior and his actions. It's a positive evidence that somehow politicians themselves think that they should change their behavior to make sure that people trust in the government, people trust in their leadership. As we see now, we have difficulties in the National Assembly in terms of passing the special bill on Sewol disaster to try to find out what happened and who are responsible and how we can avoid from repetition of this terrible incidents that hasn't come about yet. And so I think that's the collective responsibility of the political community, and I really hope that political leaders can learn the real lessons, the genuine lessons from the humble leadership of Pope Francis, and also the decisive leadership with strategy and vision, with good communication with the people.
If I may add to that, in addition to great leadership and crisis management, when I read up what the politicians were picking up from both Admiral Yi and Pope Francis, they were picking up what they wanted to hear or what they wanted to pick up. And they were talking about crisis management and from Yi Sun-sin as crisis leadership. But I think what they really need to learn is communicate and respect the other party, respect and the people, and self-sacrifice. They need to show by action that they're the ones who would first let down all their privileges, like Pope Francis has shown, and move forward toward conciliation. And I think what I read in the newspapers is they're more talking about, oh, this is a big crisis and we need to move forward with vision and courage. But before that, I would like to see them communicate more with the other, give up their privileges before asking the others to give up theirs, and so on. So I would like to see that more.
How feasible is that, though?
Well,
for them to really let down their privileges and start talking to the people and really communicating with the public.
Well, I don't think it's easy, but unless they do that, I think the people, the public, will not respect the politicians. I think after the Chuseok break, many politicians went back, National Assembly persons went back to their home districts and found that many people were disillusioned by of the National Assembly, of the politicians, and the political process in general. And unless they can show to the people they're really working for the people, I don't think they can get that respect back. And I think it will show up in the next elections. So I don't think they have a chance. They have to do it.
I used to be in politics myself, and now I'm teaching at a university, so I'm free to talk about political leadership. I think really political leaders in Korea should learn from the belief or the vision of Admiral Yi Sun-sin, who said in the movie, I think that was a very touching moment, that I love my country, I love my nation. Without nation, there can be no king. So I work for my country. That's why I listen to you. I want to communicate with you, and I care about what you think, what your problem is, and what kind of troubles you are faced with. I think that's the first step for any effective, any successful political leader to begin. And I think that's the message that people have carried to them during the Chuseok holidays, that please give us a sense of direction, please give us the solutions, not just talks, but the actions, and let's move forward instead of just struggling over the issues that has made paralysis of the political community as a whole. So I think the sense of frustration and sense of urgency was certainly carried to the mind of the political leaders, and I hope that they can somehow make any meaningful progress in the next plenary session.
Well, many have concerned that Korean politicians seem to underestimate the gravity of their political leadership problems. And as you former politician, how do you assess the current political activities displayed by these politicians?
There's no perfect political leadership, of course. And always there are demands from the public about performance of the political leadership. And I think the most important thing is to find out what people really want and what are the real problems. And from then on, you have to conduct research on what kind of policy alternatives are available, and how can you communicate with the other side, with the opposition political parties, to come to a reasonable solution. But sometimes political interest supersedes the national interest, and I think that's perhaps the most difficult part for political leaders in managing the crisis, because you have the party line, and in many cases the hardline voices carry the day instead of having a reasonable voice or the sensible demands take the floor. So listen to the people and negotiate with the opposition party with a good sense of a balance, and also exercise the art of politics, which is an art of possibilities, not just the art of confrontation, and even the physical clash between the two sides. So it's not an easy job, but I think there is an art of possibility, and we can overcome these difficulties.
I would like to stress there has been a lot of research about development of democracy, consolidation of democracy, and the most important element is that when it's so polarized, we really need leaders who are willing to listen to the other and compromise. A moderate leadership is necessary to have a true dialogue and compromise between the opposition. And I think that's why sometimes we find the political system in a paralysis rather than moving forward. And I think sometimes it is easy for the loud voices and strong messages to carry the day, but the people want more stability, want progress, rather than a complete breakdown.
And also, if I can make one more comment, the role of the presidential leadership is important because president as a head of state and the leader of the government should make sure to give a reassurance to the people that the system is well working, and even with the different views within political community, you can somehow encourage the internal discussions between different political parties and come to a good agreement. So the presidential role perhaps is to not just talk with the members of the ruling party, but also talk with the members of the opposition party to try to kind of iron out the differences and come to a good conclusion on the issues that you are faced with.
I was about to ask you on that question. Could the president's leadership style be questioned at this point?
I think in a presidential system, the president is at the top of the political hierarchy, and people look up to the president for his or her leadership. And I think that's unavoidable in a presidential democracy. So what the president says and does is critical, and I think President Park can play a very decisive role by showing with action what she can do to bring the differing parties together. What I saw in Pope Francis is, although the papal office is really about pomp and circumstances, I mean, if you see the whole gallery of people waiting and so on, it's really a very formal, institutional makeup. However, the Pope really sort of sometimes at critical moments sort of ignored the pomp and circumstances and came down to the people, met with the people, got off the papal car and just walked to the young children and babies to kiss them. And
he just couldn't help it.
Yeah, he just couldn't help it. So sometimes the formality is what blocks true action or real action, and maybe the president has to come down from the Blue House way up there to the people and be free of some of these pomp and circumstances.
Obviously, President Park Geun-hye is working hard. She spends a lot of time meeting with her secretaries and also government ministers to manage the crisis and to find good solutions, which is very good. But I also hope that she can have more chance to meet with the political leaders in National Assembly, the ruling and the opposition leaders, and sit down and frankly discuss the problems and the gravity of the difficulties that we are faced with, and to understand each other's viewpoints to find a reasonable solution to the problem. Also, I hope she can have more chance to meet with the people directly, as we have seen in the case of the Admiral Yi Sun-sin and Pope Francis, to directly meet with the people and feel their difficulties, care about them, and carry the message that I empathize with you, and that I think is the most important foundation for a very successful leadership.
So we will just have to hope that the president is watching our program right now. But I mean, many aspects of Korea, such as IT capabilities or the Hallyu, the Korean wave, those elements put the nation on top of other OECD member countries. But the credibility of the government ranks near the bottom. What's the problem here?
According to my understanding, Korea's ranking in the OECD survey is quite low. I was quite surprised to see that, how come Korea is, staying in such a low condition. The reason, I think, is transparency and accountability. That the government's work is open to the public, the database or information or decision-making system should be very transparent in order for Korea to upgrade its position in the global comparative survey on the mature democracy. And two is that we should have a clear sense of accountability by the governments, that if something like the Seoul disaster happens, then there should be those who should be responsible for the accident so that it cannot be repeated again in the future. And this transparency and accountability, I think, are the key words that we try to focus on in order to upgrade Korea's position in the global comparative survey on the mature democracy.
In addition to that, I might add that what people are looking for is consistency and stability sometimes. I think when they put money in the bank, they don't want the bank to suddenly disappear the next day, and there are a lot of assurances and guarantees for that. I think what the public has seen is, in a democracy, we have changed in the political parties from one administration, sometimes the next, or we go back and forth with different political parties. What the public have felt is that depending on who becomes president and who is the ruling party, the policies and even the system, the government system, goes through a huge change, and that's a great source of
Confusion,
concern,
perhaps.
confusion, and not knowing whether I should trust that this office, this system will be there 5 years down the road. And I think that gives a sense of fragility of what the political system can do for you, because you can bet on this for 5 years, but you don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 or the other National Assembly elections. So wanting a more systematic approach, a system that is moving forward and for the people, rather than being captured too much by the politics. And I think that's why sometimes we need a political evolution of the moderates rather than the extremes.
Yes. In terms of following best practice in terms of governing, good governance, what are the countries or what are the governments do you think that enjoy the best credibility, or you can select as this is a model that we should follow?
Right. Do you want me to name the countries?
Name the names.
Well, in general, we know that countries in, say, Northern Europe, like Sweden, Finland, or Norway, kind of Scandinavian countries, always gets a higher ranks in any survey on, say, democracy or transparency. The country like Switzerland and also New Zealand, Australia too. But 2 years ago, I was impressed with the result of the Democracy Index published by a British journal called The Economist, that Korea was actually the best in Asia, if you believe it or not, ahead of Japan and the United States, based on 5 categories like functioning of the governments or the electoral process or political culture, political participation or civic rights. We were the best, we were at the top of all the Asian democracies. So I was very proud to see that. I hope we can maintain that status in Asia so that Korea can contribute a lot to the promotion of democracy and human rights and also mature civic society in Asia. And certainly we can learn the lessons of the European countries, the mature advanced democracy like Scandinavian countries, but also we can develop our own style of mature Korean democracy based on people's public sentiment and also based on our pursuit of a welfare society in Korea. We can certainly move in that direction, and it can have an impact on other Asian countries too.
I think really it's about time for Korea to take more of a global leadership position. I think we have a lot to offer to the global community, not just Hallyu, but all due respect Hallyu, but we also have our record of very strong democracy in Asia. We have not gone back. Many countries that have gone through a democratic transition oftentimes fall back, but we have not done that. We move forward continuously on our democratic front, and I think that's something that we need to be very proud of and share with our neighbors and the world. We do a lot with development assistance to other countries, official development assistance, and I think we're the country that produced Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations. We're the home country of Jim Kim of World Bank, and so on. So we have great persons who have carried the message from Korea, and I think we should really try to play a global role of giving back to the global community by offering our ODA and other public goods, so we can be a good moral leader. I think in order to be a great a leader in a country or a country can be a leader in the global community, you really need to show your sacrifice and your support for others that go beyond just your immediate gains. So I think we ought to do that.
We're talking about global leadership. Korea has a lot to play its role. For example, our relationship with North Korea. We discussed domestic issues, but North Korea is a big issue. We are being faced with the nuclear development of North Korea and kind of very hostile policy towards the South. We need to make sure that we can establish peace and stability on the Korean peninsula by engaging with North Korea and try to find out what they think and how we can persuade them to give up its nuclear ambition and to move towards peaceful condition. And also our relationship with Japan is at a rock bottom now. And how we are going to get this problem solved. I think we need a dialogue. We need to carry the message to the Japanese public that we are not enemies. We want to have a friendly relationship. We can cooperate, but only with the condition that Japan can genuinely regret and repent on the past wrongdoings. Without solving this problem, we cannot move forward, and Korea should play a very positive, very productive role in managing our foreign relations as well. So we have a lot to do domestically and also internationally to make our country go forward.
We asked a couple of leaders in Korea about what they think is currently needed in our society in terms of leadership. So take a look.
진정한 리더는
Bosses tend to make profits by controlling and giving directions to people who are under them. But leaders are ones who create a great energy by cooperating with other people. They always try to help others achieve a bigger goal.
무엇인가 이루려고 하는 국가를 민주적으로 통치하는 지도자에게 가장 핵심적으로 필요한
As we are living in an era of democracy, a leader needs to take democratic measures when ruling a nation. The most important virtue needed for the head of a state is an ability to communicate and identify with the public. And what Pope Francis showed during his visit is an ideal role model for communication and identification. The same goes for political leadership. The capability of the president comes out of an ability to persuade. It is difficult to have political power in a democratic nation without the ability to persuade. People should communicate and win sympathy in order to persuade others. So I think the leader of a democratic nation should communicate well and identify with the public.
핵심적인 자질이다, 요소다, 저는 이렇게 봅니다. 그 민주적인 가치를 내면화해서
A leader of a democratic society should also have a democratic way of thinking and act accordingly. In that way, a leader can contribute to forming a democratic culture. As we still don't have a democratic culture, it's hard to escape from authoritarian leadership. I think it's because we have a short history of democracy. A leader should be educated in a democratic way from an early age, and that requires a lot of patience.
So people may have different ideas about what an ideal leadership, great leadership is, but I think what they would agree on right now is that the public wants to see a great leadership and a strong leadership in that sense. So lawmakers are striving to regain the public's trust. Are we seeing or will we see some progress there?
I don't know if the public really wants a strong leader. I think they want a visionary leader that transcends our common day, everyday problems. And I think that's why we were so fascinated with Admiral Yi and with Pope Francis, is because in spite of all the problems they're faced with, they sort of went above that and transcended our personal fears and greediness and really showed sacrifice for the people, understanding of the people in spite of. I think it's not because of, but really in spite of. And I think we're looking for a leader that transcends that personal gains and personal issues. And I think you meant that by the strong leadership, but right. I just wanted to make sure that that word strong did not translate into authoritarian,
of course
commanding leader. Yeah.
While these two parties try to regain public credibility, what virtue do you think members of ruling and opposition parties should strive for?
Yeah, I think the important thing is to make sure that the political parties and political leadership are committed to the principles of transparency and fairness. And the recent case of a member of the National Assembly who was requested for passing the parliamentary consent on arrest was released because of the immunity from arrest, which was a privilege written into the Constitution. So that certainly was a negative element in terms of perception of the political leadership of the country. I think we should avoid that sort of incident in the management of the National Assembly. And the Sewol disaster. The absence of leadership, I think, was the most conspicuous aspects of this story. And first, the company which owns the Sewol ferry boat was more interested in making profits rather than making sure that they abide by the rules, not to overburden the ship with extra cargo. Mm-hmm. Second, the sailors in the Coast Guard failed to guide successfully the survivors out of harm's way. And third, media made a false report that most of the people were rescued after a few hours of the incident, which was not the case. And finally, the National Assembly failed to pass the law to provide a special bill to find out what happened and who are responsible and so on. So I think the system as a whole was in lack of leadership, the absence of leadership. And without the overhaul of the whole system, this incident might happen again. So I really hope that this time we learn very important lessons from the whole experience and try to change the system, change the system way, the way the government works, and also the way the parliament works. Without that, we will face with another problems in the future. So I really hope that we can learn good lessons from the incident.
Mm-hmm. With the Sewol tragedy, I also heard that the reason why the government regulations were so minimal in that area is because this is not a very high profit-seeking business. So there's some not very good businessmen who go into this making a quick one or quick buck. Mm-hmm. And if there are services like the highway, like the rail system, subway system, that is a public good that the government must also do a proper share. Maybe the ocean ferries that go through the small islands or the ocean ferries that go overnight to Jeju may need more of a sense of a public good, and the government could play a more important role in that area to provide the necessary services to people, in addition to what Professor Park said. Mm-hmm. Finally, I also think there's a law, the so-called Kim Young-lan law in the National Assembly that has not passed. Mm-hmm. And I think people are frustrated when they see the National Assembly persons making pledges that they will give up their privileges, but not able to pass this law shows the public that, well, maybe it was just show that they said that, we're going to get rid of our privileges, but they're with their action, they're showing that maybe they're above the law. And I think that's what frustrates the public and shows our discontent with the politicians.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if that law passes, if lawmakers show to the public by their actions that they will give up the privilege, the immunity from arrest, then do you think that would perhaps encourage the public to believe more and have more belief in lawmakers?
I think that's the first step. I think it's really critical to show to the public that they mean what they have said that they will do. And I think this is just the first step, but a very important first step that would be a game changer.
Yeah, I think actions speak loudly than words, and I think we need a right legislation to prevent any unfortunate incidents to happen again, to make a good result.
Mm-hmm. Now, some have also raised concerns that the Korean public has perhaps become too enthusiastic about historical figures and overseas leadership. They're looking for leadership overseas. Any thoughts on those criticisms?
What I find most impressive in the leadership of Admiral Yi Sun-sin is the power of positive thinking. That he actually transformed the fear and desperation among his own soldiers, among his own subordinates. And the people against the invading forces of the Japanese Armada into courage and into action. And therefore he could defend the country. And that power of positive thinking certainly is the most striking element of his leadership, in addition to the leadership based on communication and compassion, to understand the people's real problems and troubles.
If we were not talking about a leader a few hundred years ago, if we are focused on the present time, who do you think is the most respectable leader in the Korean society today?
Well, people mostly talk about the president. President Park Geun-hye, I think, is certainly working hard, and she's trying to manage the crisis. She's trying to work with the government ministers and officials. But I think that there are other important political leaders, like the Speaker of the National Assembly, Prime Minister, or Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, within the institutions. Also, we have great religious leaders in this country, as Professor Kim mentioned. The academic leaders and the religious leaders and cultural leaders all work to provide a better society with a better vision and better dream for the future. So it's not just a country run by one person, we try to create some sort of a collective, democratic, open leadership of the country so that we can create a better and mature democracy.
I think someone who, I can't really name one person, but I think there are many, as Professor Park has mentioned, but who can show us the way and show a vision that we all can agree on. I think that's very important for the leader to show what our vision can be, to embrace everyone, embrace the differences, and to move forward. And I think that's what we really yearn for in a leader. I think in the past we had very strong sort of authoritarian leaders that led the way regardless of what the public thought. But now we're looking for a leader who's compassionate, who can work with the people, humble leader, but also still provide a vision for the country and for the world, I think. I really hope that in the years to come, in the near future, we hope that Korea can really be a global leader. And I think we have a lot that we receive from the world, that it's now about time that we also provide leadership and support for the world in a very positive way.
So we only have about 3 months to go until the year comes to an end, and it seems like the nation's political leaders, business leaders, and religious leaders, for that matter, have a lot to do and have to step up efforts to end the year 2014 on a more positive note. But thank you very much today for coming into the studio and having this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pope Francis and Admiral Lee are great leaders who deliver actions rather than speaking words. We hope that our politicians follow their footsteps.
Indeed, and that does it for this edition of Upfront.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.